CNN has obtained new texts that show how two congressional Trump allies went from encouraging the White House efforts to overturn the 2020 election, or at least block the results, to ultimately warning them about the consequences. Ryan Nobles has this CNN exclusive story. There's a lot in here, Ryan.
Yeah, no doubt about that, John. Good morning from Capitol Hill. And what our exclusive report reveals, for the first time, are close to 100 text messages between two Republican lawmakers and the then White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. These text messages reveal a willingness by these lawmakers to be open to the idea that there was enough evidence of fraud and a legal precedent to prevent the certification of the election results. But as time ticked closer to January 6th, both men agreed that the Trump plan was not going to work, and they were encouraging Meadows to convince Trump to stand down.
Senator Mike Lee of Utah and Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, two of former President Donald Trump's most loyal defenders in Congress. But in dozens of private texts to Trump's Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, a picture emerges of how both went from aiding the effort to challenge the election results to ultimately warning against it. The texts obtained by CNN show how they were trying to help initially, but by the end raised concerns to Trump's top deputy about his campaign's effort to stand in the way of the certification of the 2020 election. "We're driving a stake in the heart of the federal republic," Roy warned Meadows in a text message on January 1st that is in possession of the January 6th Select Committee.
All my friends here in the
His stark warning came after weeks of begging Meadows for hard evidence of election fraud and concerns that the lack of specific evidence was a real problem for the Trump legal team. "We must urge the president to tone down the rhetoric," he wrote to Meadows on November 9th.
Why is the Attorney General?
Roy did believe that there were problems with the election. In early December, he went to the House floor, imploring his colleagues to look into the thin examples of fraud.
The American people are raising legitimate questions about our elections, and this body is missing in action and doing nothing.
Like Roy, Senator Mike Lee started out hopeful that there was a path to challenge the election results. In early November, he touted the work of conservative lawyer Sidney Powell, encouraging Meadows to get her an audience with the president, calling her a, quote, straight shooter. But less than 2 weeks later, Powell appeared with Rudy Giuliani in what would become an infamous press conference where the duo made wild, baseless claims about the election.
President Trump won by a landslide. We are going to prove it.
Lee then changed his tune, calling Powell a liability and turning his focus to touting attorney John Eastman. Lee pushed a plan to convince state legislatures to offer up a set of alternate electors. When that plan fizzled, Lee decided he was no longer on board. He texted Meadows on December 16th, quote, "I think we're now past the point where we can expect anyone will do it without some direction and a strong evidentiary argument." Both Lee and Roy ultimately chose not to join other Republicans to vote against certifying the election.
Our job is to open and then count. Open, then count. That's it. That's all there is.
Privately, they were even more emphatic about the fool's errand Trump's team was on. "The president should call everyone off. It's the only path," Roy texted Meadows on December 31st. While Lee argued the effort was on dangerous constitutional ground. 3 days before January 6th, he warned, "I know only that this will end badly for the president unless we have the Constitution on our side." They did not. But the Trump team and a group of loyal Republicans went ahead with their plan anyway. As it became clear their effort would not be successful, hundreds of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol in protest. As the violence was raging, Roy texted Meadows, "Fix this now."
As the gentleman from Texas.
He then went to the House floor and placed the blame squarely at President Trump's feet.
And the president should never have spun up certain Americans to believe something that simply cannot be.
And both the offices of Mike Lee and Chip Roy responded to our reporting. Chip Roy's spokesperson say that the congressman believes the texts speak for themselves. As for Mike Lee, his spokesperson telling us that he had been fully transparent about his concerns about the election during this time frame, and the texts do not contradict what he was saying publicly. John.
All right, Ryan Nobles with this exclusive report. Ryan, thank you very much. I want to bring in George Conway, attorney and contributing columnist for the Washington Post. George, what do you think?
It's a remarkable chronology, and I think the key to its significance is the contrast with Trump's behavior. The judge in California who said that Donald Trump likely committed crimes pointed out all the evidence that was presented to Trump or available to Trump that he should have known that there was no fraud sufficient to overturn the election. And what you see with these texts is a remarkable chronology of in real time of them wanting to find evidence of fraud, and then not hearing any from Giuliani and Sidney Powell, and of all the cases they lost, 60 plus in federal state courts throughout the country. And they came to the conclusion that there was no constitutional way to overturn this election. And yet Donald Trump persisted.
These two members, Lee and Roy, Senator Lee and Representative Roy, basically saying, help me, help you.
Right.
Help me, help you. But then over time, they realized there was, in their words, there was no help there. Just look at the evolution from Chip Roy here. This was a text right after the election. He goes, we need ammo. We need fraud examples. But then later he's saying the president should never have spun up certain Americans to believe something that simply cannot be true. He never got the ammo.
Right. There was no there. And that's the point. That's the point that the judge in California is making about Donald Trump's probable intent, was he did not care whether or not there was evidence or not.
And again, let me just read more from Mike Lee here. He writes again, closer to January 6th, I only know that this will end badly for the president unless we have the Constitution on our side. And unless these states submit new slates of Trump electors pursuant to the state law, we do not. It never happened. He told them. I mean, this gets to state of mind and consciousness of guilt. Mark Meadows certainly knew.
Right. I mean, and he basically was saying this was a violation of the Constitution to proceed with trying to overturn the election and getting certificates from the states. If you didn't have those valid certificates of the states, that would be a violation of the Constitution. And yet, Donald Trump on January 5 is trying to get Mike Pence, browbeating him, bullying him into trying to not count the valid electoral certificates that were signed and sealed and reflected the actual victory of Joe Biden.
Does this in any way hurt the former president in terms of whatever legal case he might face?
I think it should, because I think I think the contrast, whether it's specifically admissible into evidence, I'd say for another day, but I think overall it just illustrates the amount of evidence there is that should have been made, that probably was, and definitely was to some extent, made apparent to Trump that he lost. And there's, so much other evidence. There's the White House counsel's office. You've got Barr. You've got the other members of the Justice Department saying, there's no there. You don't have any evidence.
So I just want you to explain the distinction so people understand this. Mike Lee, from the beginning, was calling on the state legislatures, around the country to submit alternate slates of electors, different slates of electors, calling on the legislatures to do so. How is that different than this scheme that was being cooked up within Trump world to just submit different electors?
It wasn't. It's really the same thing, although I think Mike Lee pulled back when he realized that, there was no legal basis in the first place, but there was no factual basis for these legislatures to conclude that the election did not go the way it went.
What Mike Lee was basically saying is the legislators are the ones who need to send the new electors. They never did.
Correct.
They never did. I want to talk about some New York Times reporting overnight also. Stephen Miller, president's former aide, the former president's aide and speechwriter, testified yesterday before the January 6th committee, I guess for several hours. And they were very focused on the speech that he gave on January 6th at the Ellipse, asking a lot of questions about the choice of language used, why the former president kept on saying, we, when he spoke to the crowd there. I just want to listen to a little bit of that speech. No? We don't have it. Well, he kept on referring to that speech repeatedly, talking about we. Why does the language choice there matter?
Well, because it's like the language, I don't remember a specific language, but it's like, we must fight. We must go to Capitol Hill. We must show strength. And by saying we, he was saying, you're doing this for me. We're doing this together. And it goes straight to the question of what Donald Trump thought he was doing. Was he inciting a riot at the Capitol? And that's probably what they spent a lot of time asking him about, according to the New York Times report, is about, okay, why did you choose that word we? Why, what were you trying? What was the object there? And, the fact of the matter is, it's secondary to to what we saw and what is out in the public. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we did see the language was inflammatory. The language was encouraging people to go up and essentially intimidate the vice president. He's saying things like Mike Pence has to show strength, and the fact that is that a lot of the people who have been charged for committing violence on Capitol Hill or being trespassing on Capitol Hill on January 6th have said they did it because of Donald Trump.
What does it tell you the committee is asking these questions and what we think is probably like the ninth inning of the game here for them in terms of the investigation? Where do you think they are right now?
Well, I think you're right. They have to be at the ninth inning. I think they've been promising that they're going to have hearings sometime in May, so they need to be wrapping up. They have a lot of evidence to go through, and we've only seen just a tip of the iceberg. There's got to be a lot more there that we haven't seen, and we're going to be in for quite a show, I think, in May.
George Conway, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.